Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and tonight I'm going to be talking about the Mayflower. And the reason why I've chosen that as a topic is mainly because today is the 9th of November, and famously the Mayflower, after sailing a good 60 odd days, had actually sighted Cape Cod on this day in 1620. So that's why I'm talking about that. Now, we've been involved in Mayflower 400 purely because Worcester has links to it, and as I always say, and this upsets a lot of people, Worcester is technically linked to everything. We've seen all the major events in British history, and in some cases, as here, international history as well. And the link really is down to this man, and I'll show you a painting of him. This is a man called Edward Winslow, and the famous thing about this painting specifically is we do have paintings of other pilgrims that went across to the Americas in 1620. However, this is the only painting of a pilgrim done whilst he was alive. All the others were basically taken from descriptions and things like that, really. So this is definitely a pilgrim. And the famous thing is he was born in Droitwich, moved into Worcester to be schooled at King's School. And if anyone's been to King's School, maybe an ex-pupil, they will know there is a building with the name Edward Winslow, the Winslow building, for example. So there's Edward Winslow just to there. He's an interesting man. Born into a wealthy salt merchant's family, as he would be. He's from Droitwich after all. And likewise, he got a very, very good education at the King's School. He then went down to London, where he eventually became a printer's apprentice. And that's where he started to see and meet with separatists. And that is a completely radical group, shall we say, really, in the 1600s. And he actually started producing a vast amount of leaflets for that organisation. Now, if I take a look at that period in time, the 1600s, it was a time where people were starting to think more outside the box. So instead of following a set religion, as we always have done, going as far back as the Middle Ages, even with the birth of the Church of England, there was now more organisations starting to appear. And this continues throughout the whole of the 17th century, especially during the English Civil War, where you've got things like the Quakers, the Ranters, the Levellers, for example. So the 1600s is a period where there's a lot of these organisations. And this little woodcut, obviously a replica, just goes to show how people were thinking outside the box. Do you really need a church? Do you really need a priest or a vicar to actually help you get to God? And there's an interesting thing. There was two very powerful organisations. One was actually the Puritans, and a lot of people often think that the Pilgrim Fathers are Puritans. Well, actually, they're not. Puritans, as the name suggests, wanted to purify the church. They believed that the church needed a big overhaul. There was a lot of things that were creeping into a church, which was very Catholic, for example, very papist, as they would say. So they wanted to purify and cleanse the church, bring it back to its basics, really. But famously, Edward Winslow and these pilgrims ended up becoming part of another group, really, which are the separatists. And these were people that believed the church needed reform in some way, but believed there was no way it could be done. So they believed it was beyond any redemption, beyond any purification, really. And one of the leading characters in this story of the pilgrims is William Brewster. And William Brewster was one of the leading separatists of the time, really, and it was he that ended up meeting with Edward Winslow, and obviously Edward Winslow started to produce a lot of their leaflets. And that's the other interesting thing about the 17th century. There is a vast amount of leafleting and pamphleteering going on, and this happens in the 1600s. It goes all the way through in the English Civil War and beyond into the 18th and 19th century. So William Brewster and he had actually arranged several escapes really from Britain to Holland, for example, for separatist groups. So separatists were coming together and they were trying to get away from Britain, and he arranged their escapes as such, and they were seen as escapes at that time. Now his home, or where his separatist meetings took place, was this building, which is Scrooby Manor, and it's quite a famous one. It's in Nottinghamshire and it's still there, as you can see from that picture there. So in this place there was a lot of meetings. Edward Winslow would have been there, and obviously Brewster would have arranged all these escapes from Britain to Holland. And like I said, the reason why they were going there is they believed that they would be able to set up their new church as such, the separatists, and they would not be bothered anymore. There won't be people constantly fining them or imprisoning them, for example. But the sad thing is, whilst they were in Holland, and they were in Holland for quite some time, they started to realise that they were losing their English identity. Now, you have to also remember that these were people not against the monarchy. They were not against the king. And that's quite important, because later on when they get to America, they do actually sign a pact to say that they are loyal to the crown of England. So these are people not like the parliamentarians later on in the 1640s. These are people that are loyal, but they just want to get on with their own religion, basically. But whilst they're in Holland, as I said, they started to discuss maybe moving to a new place. They can't go back to Britain. They can't really stay in Holland. They're not really getting on there. So they decide to actually move abroad, and they decide to go to America, this new land, basically. I say new land, it had been visited before by Westerners. For example, there was in fact a colony living in malaria marshland, which was Jamestown, and there's a little map of Jamestown just there. So they decide to try and arrange, and this takes a lot of planning, a way of setting up another settlement. And this settlement is planned. It's very, very finely planned. It's very, very heavily financed, for example. And it's the separatists that organise this. And this is where the journey to America actually begins. Now, on this map here, hopefully you can see it there, you will actually see a small red line. So this is the separatists living in Leiden, which is in Holland, just of here. So remember, they've escaped from Britain. They are enjoying themselves initially, but the problem is they're feeling that their children, for example, are becoming more Dutch than they are British, and they're struggling with the language and so on. So they've decided to go to America. Now, to get to America, they will have to go back to Britain temporarily. So they arrange for 2 ships, in fact. They arrange for the Speedwell and also another ship, which is the Mayflower. Now, the Mayflower is actually in Britain anyway, so they get on the Speedwell here and they sail back to Britain. And whilst they're there, they are getting provisions and so on, really. It's at that point that they realise that the Speedwell is not the best ship going. It is, as it said and is quoted, it leaked like a sieve. So it sounded not a very good ship at all, really. Very much like a used ship, a bit like an old used car dealership. They saw these separatists coming and they sold them relatively a very poor class of ship, really. But when we have a look at the Mayflower, now this is a replica of the Mayflower here. She's 180 tons, and that always amazes me when you think of the tonnage of ships. But when you compare it to the Titanic at 30,000 tons, she's like a little lifeboat, really. We think she was probably about a 4-decker. We're not 100% sure, but we definitely know she had 3 masts. Now, during the last lockdown back in March, I made 2 ships. I made a galleon that I can use for Tudor exploration and also for talks in workshops on the Spanish Armada from 1588. And I also made one very similar a few alterations I made to it to be the Mayflower. So this is my little lockdown project really. I managed to do a lot in the lockdown. I managed to completely clear out my store, for example, repair a vast amount of things, clean a lot of weaponry and that sort of thing. And this is my little model of the Mayflower, which I've used a few times to show people what it was like really. So it's your standard ship of the time really. It was a Dutch ship, a very deep cargo ship as such really, so it had a large hold, and it's really, as the name suggests, a cargo ship. It's not designed really for passengers, so if you are going to be a passenger on this, it's not going to be the most comfortable of journeys really. So at the front you've got the beak, also where the heads are as well, where the toilets are, and you literally go to the toilet over the side. What is often known as the foresail or forecastle as it's often referred, and then we've got the aft at the back here. And it's a fine ship. It would have had 3 sails. We know it is described as having 3 sails on it, and as you can see we've marked those on, and you can see it's also got gun ports, and that's because it was a merchant ship, and merchant ships needed to protect themselves from pirates basically. So there we have a replica of what the Mayflower would have looked like. They have built a replica Mayflower, and that was the photograph I just showed you, and that's actually moored in America itself, and they've also produced or replicated several of them ever since that date really. But on board the ship were some very important key characters. So here we have the captain. This is Captain Christopher Jones. Like I said, there are no paintings of Mayflower crew or pilgrims apart from that one of Edward Winslow, and that's what makes Edward Winslow such a special character really. So there's our captain. So he was basically in charge of the Mayflower, and then there was obviously a number of other people that are all there for the purpose of making it sail really well in efficiently. And there we have John Clark. Now John Clark was technically the pilot, which sounds a bit strange really, but he was the main navigator. And if you look through our playlist for Mayflower, you will see we have covered a lot of the navigational instruments, and he would have known those navigational instruments like the back of his hand. Then we've got some other characters. This is Miles Cavendish. Miles Cavendish was actually an important military man who was on board the ship looking after the guns, and obviously on board there was also armour and things like muskets, which are going to be used for defence and also hunting. So his job was the chief security officer for the whole voyage, but also for the founding of this new plantation in America. And then the final character, and like I said, these are often stylized drawings. Like I said, and I will say it again, Edward Winslow is the only one that has an official painting of him. This is John Carver, and he was quite an important man that did a lot of the arranging of the mission to go from Holland to England and then England to America. Now, like I said, it's now the 9th of November, and it is a key date because they left originally in July from Britain, the 2 ships that was, so that was the Mayflower and the Speedwell. The Speedwell was going extremely slow, leaking like a sieve famously, and they did have to stop several times to make repairs. In the end, and this is September now, they then decided to only take the Mayflower. So everyone ended up cramming onto this merchant ship, which must have been an absolute nightmare. When you read about the story of the Mayflower, it must have been absolutely horrific. This is not a passenger ship, this is for cargo, and there was now people being held in the cargo hold. It was a horrible journey, 66 days in total they were at sea for, several horrific storms in the Atlantic, and that's the scary thing, the fact that they had planned to go earlier in the year, but due to financial problems and the simple fact that the Speedwell was slowing them down, they didn't leave. They did not leave until September, and that was an absolute dangerous time to leave because they were now getting into Atlantic storms. And even now, just the other week in over Halloween period really, we had several storms and gales, and they all blew across from the Atlantic. So the weather that this ship, the Mayflower, was sailing through must have been absolutely horrific. But as I said, on the 9th of November, 1620, people in the crew, and in particular people that were stood in the crow's nest, sighted Cape Cod. And it was at that point they were quite joyous because they could actually see land. And you have to remember, they hadn't seen land for a very, very long time. And they knew they had actually reached the Americas. We know for a fact that they didn't land exactly where they were meant to. But when you think of the navigational instruments, like I've mentioned in other videos, there is a little, or shall we say a large amount of error that can actually crop up. You'll get to the place where you're going to, but it might not be accurately to, let's say, 100 meters of where you specifically want to get to. So like I said, tonight's video was really introducing the Mayflower journey. And like I said, they wanted to separate from normal religious observances. Really, the Puritans weren't doing it for them. They were not strict enough. So like I said, they went to Holland, Leiden, went from there, Speedwell in the Mayflower to Britain, and then they left the Speedwell behind and sailed across the Atlantic to get to America. But today, 9th of November 1620, they finally sighted land. They are now on the homeward stretch. Next few days they will be able to get to America, but they don't land straight away. So this really is an introduction with a to be continued, because I'm sure you want to know what happens next. Also, we haven't covered all the navigational instruments yet. So as always, stay safe, make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.